Welcome to this Picariello lectures. Thank you to being here. Thank you to Prof. Saltelli for this lecture, and please, Professoressa Siciliano, thank you, and please introduce this lecture.
Okay, thanks, Flora. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you Andrea Saltelli from Open University of Catalonia. He has worked recently at the University of Berger. He has many experience all over the world. We hope to have him also in the future at the University of Naples as a professor. Maybe he can offer us a very nice course in sensitivity analysis, which is the main field of his research. He has also many publications in applied statistics and environmental sciences, in post-normal sciences, in science for policy. And today he will offer us a very nice talk on ethics of quantification. So we will know something about what the numbers can tell us and whether we can trust them, and what is the best way to approach the results of any kind of computational and mathematical models. And he will consider some kind of tools that can be based on statistics, but not only. And it's a great pleasure that we have here in the Picariello lecture his talk. Thanks a lot, Andrea, and go ahead. It's now time for you.
Okay, it's my time. Okay. Allora, I will now try to share my slides. So share window. I want to share a window, and I want to share this window, which is my PowerPoint. And I will also want now to make it full screen. Maybe go to the first slide, even better. Make it full screen. Okay, now you should. No, yes, no, once more.
No, yes, it's perfect.
Okay, now we are set. So this is ethics of quantification, which is the subject of today's lecture. And this PDF, this presentation, which you are looking at, those slides are already loaded in this website, which is very easy to find because it's my just my name, and it's a website with my name. So in case you want to copy some of the references to books or articles, you don't need to scribble them down because you can find them online. So I will take it quite far away in time, and I will try to tell the story of quantification, starting from what is commonly known as the Cartesian dream or Cartesian anxiety. What is this dream? Well, this is a dream of possess and domination of nature, the dream of a procedural utopia whereby using the right amount of calculation you could compute the progress of society, and so that you could have social harmony in calculations. These are three philosophers who had a very important role into this dream. So I try to put together the prediction of Bacon, the idea of control of nature of Descartes, and the emphasis on how you can compute your way to progress of Condorcet. Let's start now with Francis Bacon. This is a page coming from the New Atlantis, a book published in 1627, 1 year after the death of Bacon. And in this is a science fiction book, okay? And in this science fiction book, the protagonist is talking to a philosopher, and the philosopher is telling to the protagonist how science will, in due time, provide man with incredible wonders. No, we can read it: the prolongation of life, the restitution of youth in some degree, the retardation of age, the curing of diseases counted incurable, the mitigation of pain, more and easy and less loathsome purgings. This is very nice because probably they had very unpleasant way of purge themselves in the 17th century, and so on and so forth. We cannot read the entire list, but what I would like to say is the following, that by and far the mission, the promise was accomplished. So science did indeed achieve all these which in a sense Bacon promised. And more, one could say that if we compare this list to what science has achieved, probably science has achieved more than this promise of Bacon. Now we move to Descartes, and the trajectory of Descartes is very strange, because though he clearly studies with the Jesuit and he had a very good humanistic training, he came to reject all what he learned by the good Jesuit father, imagine, and says, oh, all what I've been taught is just philosophical blah blah, disquisition of the ancient moralist, castle built on sand. So he ends up condemning, in a sense, humanity as and exalting geometry and mathematics. And then he goes on to say, well, following this path, the path of mathematics, geometry, etc., throwing away this speculative philosophy of old time, I think we can discover a practical way of knowing which will give us the control and the force of action on fire, water, air, the stars, the heavens, and all the other bodies. And in this way, and this is the most famous sentence which everyone always quotes, man can become lord and possessor of nature. If you want, and if you similar things have also been said by Bacon. This idea of possessing nature. If you read the page of Bacon on this, is also very politically incorrect, because practically this extracting the secret of nature from her womb are described in the language which resemble a rape, in fact, which eventually became the rape of nature. But in the way, at that age, it was a different kind of rape they had in mind. They had in mind extracting, stealing, the secrets of nature from her womb. And now we come to Condorcet. And Condorcet is a very interesting character. He lived during the French Revolution and died during the French Revolution. And he represents what we would today call the optimistic vision, the progressive vision of enlightenment, and he was so convinced of enlightenment that he thought that all errors, including errors in social and political life, were connected to physical error. This is very difficult to grasp for us today, but one might help saying that at that time one did not have scientists, but natural philosophers. So for Condorcet, in a sense, when errors are made, even in the sphere of social, it's because they are errors in philosophy. And he makes an example in this small book, a sketch for the historical picture of the progress of the human spirit. In the last chapter of this small book, which is also available online, he says, well, let's make an example of a population, scarcity of resources. Not at all, he says. And he says something very nice. He says, this will not happen, the Malthusian bomb will not explode, because ethical progress and technical progress will go hand in hand. Okay, well, this is a vision shared even by some people today, but it was very strong in the age of enlightenment among the philosophers of the generation of Condorcet. Men will understand that his duty will consist not in the question of giving existence to a greater number of beings, but happiness. And this was written in the 18th century, toward the end of the 18th century. So I would like to say, as I mentioned before, that this is really the progressive view of enlightenment, the one which was dramatically attacked by the School of Frankfurt, which sees in the Enlightenment the beginning of a terrible barbarism and the opening of the door to the fascism and capitalism in its crudest form. But still, it was very powerful at the time, and Condorcet had a justification for having this vision of, for instance, mathematics helping in solving social problem, because he was an expert in what we would today call voting theory, decision theory. Even today, if you work in multi-criteria analysis, you will discover that there is a method known as method of Condorcet. So any multi-criteria ordering problem has one and only one Condorcet winner or Condorcet ranking procedure, and so on and so forth. So it's still, you know, it's still alive today in the book of voting or decision theory. And so he thought, if we have a good rule for taking a decision, and this can help, for instance, a tribunal or electors, why shouldn't similar methods apply to the whole of society? This was the reckoning. So he thought that really one could have this computational good spreading all over society. So, and the point I was trying to make in this slide is that the so-called Cartesian dream always had a heavy quantification agenda. Numbers were important indeed. Now I make a jump of 1 century, no, half a century, well, roughly 1 century, and I have to say that the idea of Condorcet was fully taken up by the so-called utilitarianism, which is a current of philosophical thought. Here is Jeremy Bentham. It's very famous. It's very famous for various reasons. If you go to London, somewhere in London, there is a place where you have his head mummified, which is quite and then he's also famous for the panopticon, this idea that you can build a prison where the warden can watch in each and every cell. So what to say? If you want more on this, this is a book on the Cartesian dream, which also has a very beautiful introduction by Jerry Ravitz on Descartes. By the way, this book was hacked by the Russian hacker of LibGen. So you'll find a copy of this book on my website, and you don't have to buy it because it's also very expensive. Now, as I mentioned before, the Cartesian dream was very successful. Normally in this section of the slide, I can show you all the beautiful things which we achieved by science. But, you know, for the sake of conciseness, let me just show you. This is a few weeks ago, a few months ago, the landing of Perseverance on Mars. But science goes so quickly that in the intervening time, even the Chinese have landed now on Mars. And it is really quite an achievement for mankind. So I would say that, you know, things like this really fully vindicate the dream of Bacon, that man would eventually conquer the stars. And especially if you are, those of you who are natural scientists, you are really trained in this dream. Nobody told you that they were giving you the Cartesian dream, but the way you were trained in the study of science and mathematics and geometry, the idea that that the truth could be discovered by would eventually be discovered by the tool of science is incredibly powerful. And Toulmin called this the hidden agenda of modernity. What Toulmin is alluding to, and here Toulmin is obviously in agreement with the School of Frankfurt, is that this idea that, say, enlightenment instrumented by science and positivism ended up being the real religion of modernity. This is what Stephen Toulmin has in mind. So the dream, as I mentioned, was spectacularly successful, so that another great scholar of social science and technology studies, Stephen Shapin, called this, talks about invisible science, meaning that if you look around you in the room, let alone your computer, but everything around you is probably the result of some manufacturing process which has science at its root. So we live in a world which is physically, materially built out of science. And now we go back to the main issue of this talk, which is on the issue of quantification. I know that you are all studying about how to quantify, and so here my voice will be critical, because I will be looking at those voices that are not terribly convinced that things are evolving in the right direction, and there are at least some dangers of which we should be aware. And the first thing I want to share with you is that when I say quantification, I want to allude to numbers which are both visible and invisible. University ranking produce visible numbers. So this university is number one, the number is visible. But when you go to the bank and ask for the mortgage and the mortgage is not given to you, this is also a number, but this number is invisible. You don't see the number here, but the numbers are being crunched by the expert system, which eventually decide that based on the information available, you don't qualify for a mortgage. And I think that these numbers have a lot in common, whether they are visible or invisible. And in fact, I take comfort in this sociologist, Bob Berman, who wrote a very interesting review on the sociology of quantification, saying that really there are not many qualities which are specific of ranking, indicators, models, or algorithms. And I fully subscribe to this vision that we should consider all these instances of quantification as belonging to a single big issue. And I was mentioning, and also Bob Berman make this point, that in recent years there has been a tremendous explosion of works from within and without from many disciplines about quantification. I'll try to give you the flavor of all these books. I promise you that I've read all these books, okay? So if this is not the case, I will say it explicitly. Rigor mortis is about numbers in medical research, use of statistics in medical research. Useless arithmetic is about mathematical modeling in regulation. Tyranny of metric is about rating and ranking mostly. Weapons of math destruction put together algorithms and metrics. Stat activism is about statistical work, especially statistics about the state, official statistics. Trust in Number is a classic book on the first, maybe the most important book in the sociology of numbers. Alain Soupiot is a law person, is a jurist, and he makes an analysis of what happened when the laws are replaced by numbers, by algorithms. These are other books. Quantification is about use of indicators for violence on women and human trafficking. Politics of Uncertainty is also a very nice book, which is freely available online on how uncertainty is in most cases downplayed in this quantification. The Age of Surveillance Capitalism is a very, very large book written by Shoshana Zuboff. Is a really scaring book in the sense that she's pointing to a dystopia in the future where a new kind of capitalism is establishing itself, called surveillance capitalism. Engines of Anxiety is about rating of law school. Again, this issue of rating of higher education and the damage done by these ratings. And all these authors have a common concern. They talk about how numbers act on the real. No, they provoke a reaction. They have a reactivity. They say that a number produced today affects which number will be produced in the future. And for Katie O'Neill, numbers create the environment that justify their assumptions. I don't know if you can immediately grasp the meaning of the last statement. It's something like, you remember when Facebook said that, move fast and break, Zuckerberg said, move fast and break things. In a sense, number do move fast and break things, and by the time they are out, they have already created the environment which justify their being there. I hope this is clear. I know that I'm trying to push a lot of concept in a short time. Okay, so Number and Trust, I mentioned, is the most famous book on sociology of quantification, written by Theodore Porter. And he makes many interesting points in this book. So many absurdities about quantification, the madness of cost-benefit analysis. But maybe the most important book is that quantification is never independent of trust in the quantifier or in the state who produce the numbers. So to make an example, he compares les ingénieurs des ponts et des chaussées here on the left and the US Army Corps engineers. And what happens, according to Porter, is that les ingénieurs the point is to say in France, they are very much trusted. You may have read somewhere that France is the only country which does not oppose nuclear power. And it is mostly because the French trust their nuclear engineers. On the other hand, when it comes to the US Army Corps engineers, they operate in a totally different context and in environment, very conflictual, with a lot of conflict of competence between federal and local level, so that they have to quantify under a very fixed system of guidelines, so that their quantification becomes mechanical in a sense. They become a system, and system can be played. So there is a lot to say about the high quality of the quantification made by the engineer and let's say the less good quantification made by the US Army Corps engineer. And this book was written before Katrina, no? Maybe you may have read that after Katrina, the engineers took a serious beating because everyone accused them of not having alarmed and alerted and prepared the system of dams and locks for the typhoon. Okay, so here we have Katie O'Neill. She's one of us, or one of you if you wish. She's not a philosopher, she's a data scientist, and she wrote this very intelligent little book. If you don't want to read anything else, read this book because it's small, short, punchy, and goes straight to the point of the risks which are brought about by this kind of algorithm and rating. And they say that they are opaque, also because some of the algorithms belong to owners, and they can be used for recruiting, for career, including the career of researcher, prison sentencing, paroling, so releasing on parole, custody of minors, but they can also, as you know, after Cambridge Analytica, they can also be used to influence voters and so on. So they say that this opacity, when you couple them with the scale, the possibility to scale up, take for instance university ranking. You know, when they were developed, for instance, the Jiao Tong index for higher education ranking, they were just developed for monitoring the rate of comparison between US and China, but it scaled up to become a universal measure of performance of higher education. So this algorithm have a very large opportunity for scaling up. They can do a lot of damage. You cannot appeal, like, you know, when you go to the bank and they don't give you a mortgage, you cannot complain with the officer, with the employee in front of you, because he will tell you, sorry, this is an algorithm. I don't even know why you don't get this mortgage, because this is simply the result of the algorithm. So for Katie O'Neill, this makes the algorithm an instrument of oppression, or if you prefer, domination and inequality. Now, for those of you who have Netflix, I strongly suggest you watch this short movie, or 1 hour movie, called Coded Bias. The movie was the result of the activistic work of this young woman you see here. She made a campaign against facial recognition software when she discovered that she could not be recognized by the software because she was black. And so she had to put, as you see here, a white mask so that the computer could recognize her as a human being. And because of that, she started a movement against facial recognition algorithm. She also gave a big impulse to the Algorithmic Justice League. And you can see below the important newspapers who helped with this campaign against the use of facial recognition software. The story went on so that she managed to convince Octavio Ocasio-Cortez, who is this very famous Democratic representative, and she's made an inquiry. She led an inquiry of the American lower house, I believe, into the damages or the risk of facial recognition software. So this is a very nice case of activism in action. Something which should be really mentioned, especially for the student in relation to the metrics, is that maybe the biggest obstacle to measuring things is that when you start measuring things, the measure rapidly become not very useful because it distorts the behavior. No, when a measure, if I measure you by the number of papers you publish, you will tend to publish more paper, smaller paper, right? So your behavior will not be motivated by making a good quality paper, but of making many papers. So this is a typical stupid example, but so people will understand what is meant when a measure becomes a target. So if the target is number of paper, you do number of paper. If the target is number of citation, you will work on the number of citation, and so on and so forth. But in this way, the measure becomes, in a sense, corrupted. And this is very much the subject of this other small book. This is also very little and very entertaining, with a lot of interesting story of both successful and unsuccessful quantification. He also mentioned, of course, the Goddard law, and has a lot of case studies, including war, indicators for war, medicine, foreign aid. I mean, you know, the Vietnam War was a famous case study of how all the numbers were truly bad numbers. You know, they were a result of manufacturing activity. And so it makes also the point that you have a lot of unintended consequences when you keep using these metrics. By the way, if you study management, you will know that in new public management theory, there is a very heavy use of measures of performance. Now we will maybe go back later about that. But here you have goal, displacement, short-termism, mean diminishing utility, rule cascade. What is a rule cascade? If I make a rule and you play the rule, you game the rule, I will have to complexify the rule. No? And so there will be a kind of loop where the rule become more and more complicated. No? This is how bureaucracy, you know, grow, and then you end up with something unmanageable. Time waste, loss of productivity, discourage cooperation, because if you and I are rated on the same metrics, we are not encouraged to cooperate, because we are, you know, we have the same, we are measured by the same yardstick, so we want to perform well, and this goes against working together. So Müller concludes the book saying, you know, keep always in mind that in some cases, the best use of metrics may be not to use them at all. This is, I'm going through different strands of this critique of quantification. This is very original, very French, I would say, also because the sociology of quantification has a very strong school in France, thanks to authors like Bourdieu, de Rosière, and others. And what these people do is a movement of statistical resistance against statistics, for instance, produced by the French Statistical Office, the INSEE. So here is Bourdieu. He was famous for saying that sociology must and should also use irony. Sociology must be fun. His famous book, Les Héritiers, made a scandal in France because it told the French people that though they believed that the educational system was egalitarian, promoting, you know, equality, égalité, and all that, in fact, following the analysis of Bourdieu, it was a system which was instead fostering and radicalizing social inequalities. So you can also be a stat activist by using statistical judo, which means use the Goddard law. If someone is trying to measure you using a metrics, you try to play the metrics. And this is what, for instance, all policemen do when, like, for instance, in New York, there is CompStat, which is a software used for measuring the performance of different police districts. And what the policemen do is to adapt the way they report of their work to the software in order to look better in the rating. This is another very famous case. There was a few years ago a lot of brouhaha about the growth of society being driven by the existence of how was it called? The creative class. There was an American, Florida, who wrote this book on the creative class, and he said, oh, what makes, you know, society successful is that they have this creative class, especially in big city. But thanks to this analysis of the stat activist, it was discovered that this creative class was in fact composed of precarious intellectuals. And this includes people in research. You may have heard of something called the proletarianization of the labor research force, which means that if today you enter into a laboratory of any university, most of the people you see operating machinery or chemistry or doing analysis, they are not tenured. They are just people on temporary contracts. This is another way of being a stat activist, measuring something different. Suicide at French Telecom. This was a famous case in France where people were killing themselves in France Telecom, and nobody noticed until the stat activists made this to become an issue. And this was because France Telecom had been privatized, and the head of France Telecom was being ruthless in the way he was handling the staff of France Telecom, moving them around or firing them, so that it was a peak of suicide. Then there was also an inquiry and a trial. The guy was tried, and I think he got away from this with a small fine of a few thousand euros. Okay, this is the way society works. And then there is also this case of a new French measure of poverty, because all the statistical offices in every country, including in Italy, also Istat measure inequality. INSEE was measuring inequality and poverty, and the stat activists, in cooperation with the trade unions, they were of the opinion that these measurements were not very good. They were not doing a very good job, and so they developed a new one. Okay, so it's important of the stat activists, they do not reject quantification. This sentence I show you comes from Bourdieu, I believe, and he says you should not abandon quantification for singularities or exemplarity or other way of describing society, because abandoning numbers would be a tactical error. Oh, I promised to say something about this book. So she talks about how surveillance capitalism driven by big data coupled with cognitive psychology. Now we should open a big window here to describe how cognitive psychology is used, but I cannot do that. You have to read the book. There are a couple of chapters on this, on how artificial intelligence can make experiment in cognitive psychology in real time on large sample, which could not be done before. And hence you have a new kind of power which is generated because of this new technology. She called this instrumentarian power, and this instrumentarian power make possible a new brand of capitalism, which she calls surveillance capitalism, which is of course another source of inequality and power asymmetry. I must say that if you like reading in French, a similar story also in relation to the use of cognitive psychology and evolutionary psychology can be found in this recent book, Les Gardiens de la Raison, where again it describes how, in this case, corporations try to influence the worldview of citizens in relation to the way they perceive the use of science and technology, so that this citizen becomes, without knowing, supporters of corporate projects and policies in fields like GMO, nuclear energy, climate change, and so on and so forth. It's an interesting interview, interesting journalistic, investigative journalistic work. For Louise Amour, she makes a criticism of all these issue. I know that one of you works in ethics of algorithms, and Amour says there is around this idea that you can make the algorithm good or transparent, and she says this is not going to happen because, first of all, I mean, can you imagine a bank using an algorithm which gives money to the poor people? Well, this is clearly not going to happen. So on one hand, nobody would have use for a good algorithms. And when it comes to transparent, this is also not going to happen because, again, as we said before, or as Katie O'Neill said, in the moment in which the algorithms enter into the life, it creates its own set of values and assumptions around the world. In other words, the world after the introduction of the algorithm is not the same world as before the adoption of the algorithm. So that, pardon, in a sense, it's not we who can do the ethics to algorithms, it is the algorithms doing the ethics to us. The algorithm decide what is good and what is bad. Here we have, so that you know that this exists, something called data colonialism. This has nothing to do with North-South, it's nothing to do with the colonies. This has to do with the fact that thanks to the new social media, corporate power is invading a space which was once upon a time your own space, private space. You know, when you listen to music, when you listen to Spotify, when you tweet, when you chat, when you do whatever online, no, all these kind of life, which was once upon a time a private life, is now a public life, and on this public life, business is made. So it's a kind of colonialism. So it's part of your life which is being colonized. And this article by Kudry is very interesting. I read it. It's very interesting on the subject. Oh, how are we doing with the time? Yes, we have some time yet. So this is a jurist, as I promised. Now this book has also been translated in English, and he's especially concerned with the substitution of laws by algorithms in the service of a neoliberal logic. And he talks about the era of the cybernetic imaginary. What is the cybernetic? Now I should say, once upon a time, you had the so-called Taylorian organization of work. You as a worker sold to your employer your hours. Now it works in a different way. Your employer gives you objectives, target, and mean to measure the achievement of those targets. So this is cybernetic because you can adapt. You need to adapt to the target, continuously. So you are continuously mobilized, day, night. You have, you are continuously in the pursuit of your target. This is why I call this cybernetic, like a thermostat. No. So by again repudiating the goal of governing by just law, this new discourse about, for instance, new public management advocates the attainment of measurable objective efficiently. And he talks about something which I would call refeudalization. It's a bit linked to the non-appellability of which Cationelli was also talking. If you cannot appeal, what do? So according to Alain Soupiot, since the democratic means of appeal have been eroded, all what you can is to find someone more powerful than you to protect you. And this can happen to the individual level, to the company level, and to the country level. Then there is I make in this slide a very compact summary of a big discussion on economics become too mathematized. I cannot discuss all this author with you, but economics is surely the field where the mathematization is more felt and where the consequences are probably more dramatic. You only have to think of the financialization of the economy. The financialization of the economy and online trading is made possible precisely by algorithms. And also another important line of thought in this is the fact that you can use mathematics to hide normative assumption. And this is what Paul Romer said, no? You use mathematics to hide typically a kind of pro-market, pro-free market, neoliberal kind of ideology in this case. Okay, so about this idea of the Cartesian dream, which could be have a parallel in the Ricardian dream, no? From Ricardo, the idea that you have this kind of trade which is always beneficial, which is another big story. It was never true, but it's a story which is very strongly fought for by the prevailing ideologies. The prevailing ideology is all for free trade, which is in fact not what rich countries have done to become rich. We cannot go in that now, but even here, mathematics play an important role. We should also be aware that although I've been talking about all these things, the prevailing imaginary is what we could call the socio-technical imaginary is much more optimistic. First of all, what is the socio-technical imaginary, and how our idea of where eventually the progress will lead us? Okay, where will progress lead us? This is a kind of socio-technical imaginary because it's about society, but also about technology. And the prevailing socio-technical imaginary is quite techno-optimistic. Aaron Bastani, who's almost Marxist, says that because of nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, we will have automated luxury communism. For Harari, I guess you have read Harari, he wrote several interesting, amusing books. We will become a new race, no? Homo sapiens will be superseded by a new kind of man because of, again, nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, the so-called transhumanism. And for these two technologies, platform capitalism is a way to go. They are presented in this book. They don't give a damn about the idea that all these kind of technology de facto destroy jobs at an unprecedented rate. In a way, in this kind of technological elite thinking, there is maybe no looking back. Okay, so there is not even the idea that you might reflect on the consequences of technology. In quantification, we have the same story. The idea that you can decide quantifying is very strong. Cass Sunstein won a very prestigious prize in the social science for his work on cost-benefit analysis. He argues that if we disagree, it's only because we don't know well the fact. I find this statement, really verging on the hilarious. But this is what apparently sells a lot of books. But with this kind of theory, Wilhelm Nordhaus won the Nobel Prize for Economics for having calculated the economic consequences of climate change in dollars to the year 2100. And even here we are bordering on the hilarious. How can you calculate dollars in 2100? Many could ask, shall we have dollars in 2100? But this is it. And then there is, in all this discussion, and now I go a bit on my own work, a big chapter on statistical and mathematical modeling. In statistics, you may have heard about the reproducibility crisis and the fact that statisticians are now so concerned about the poor use of the test of significance that they are talking about making away with it, throwing it away. And this is giving, and what is surprising is that the statisticians were so frustrated with poor use of statistical methodology that they collected signatures among statisticians to appeal to the American Statistical Association so that there could be some kind of statement to repel significance. This has given rise to a sort of statistical wars. Deborah Mayo there wrote a famous book on that. I myself wrote about this with my friend Philip Stark. There is really a lot going on in here, which is very complex and complicated. What shall I say? The positive things about statistics is that they are aware of the problem, and the problem is discussed out in the open. And this is not given in the other fields of quantification. I made an effort to argue that in mathematical modeling, the situation is even worse. And why so? Well, because mathematical modeling is not a discipline, so it's very unregulated. It's not like statistics. So mathematical modeling cannot do, like statistics did, a statement on how to go about statistical significance and p-test, and use of the p-test, which is the most common, widely used test of significance. Then maybe another time we do a lesson on the p-test. This would be interesting to see how this evolved through the years. This is a paper I managed to publish with 21 brave colleagues about mathematical modeling to make all this point that the mathematical modeling situation is very serious. This is a list of the authors, and it's really very heterogeneous. There are modelers, philosophers, epidemiologists, historian, philosopher, STS scholars. So all of us, we try to make a discussion on how models have acquired a lot of new power, because they have become part of the taking of measures in relation to COVID, for instance. Here is an article about that. And also how models have become embedded into conflicts. Here is, for example, a right-wing American pundit saying that he doesn't like model at all, because models were used to suggest policy of quarantine and lockdown. So when urgency, stakes, values, and uncertainty collide, you have conflicts, and now models are fully embedded into this kind of conflict. Another scholar, which I mentioned below, talks about mathematical models as public troubles. In the article, we wrote this sentence, which was not terribly appreciated by the modelers, but we still stick to it, that modelers should not be permitted to project more certainty than their model deserve, and politicians must not be allowed to offload accountability to models, because what happened during the COVID epidemic is that some politician, for instance, Johnson in the UK, said, oh, but we are following the science. We are doing this by the science. The model said that, to which many scientists correctly replied that, no, you take decision. We are only giving you information and evidence on which you can take a decision, but you cannot dump the responsibility for the decision on the scientists themselves. So in this article, we make a number of important, well, for us, important request that one should be very careful about the spoken and unspoken assumption, and so you should use uncertainty analysis and sensitivity analysis to make this become transparent, and also the users should demand this. So this article was written not only for those who develop model, but also for those who receive models. Modelers tend to like big models, no, because they want to be more powerful, but sometimes these large models are really relevant. They are too uncertain to be of any use, but there should be a control on that. This is a famous trade-off between model complexity and error. So if you increase the complexity of a model, initially you decrease the error because your model becomes more accurate. But then you increase the error because you have propagation, because you have added other parameters, and each parameter has its own error. So this is, I mean, modelers should know these things, but often they are neglected. Here is a work in progress where we try to demonstrate using a large class of mathematical model that indeed you have an increase in uncertainty when you increase the number of parameters and when the number of parameters interact with one another. This is a more technical paper, but to show that there is a technical side to this discussion, which is far from obvious. I mean, many people would not take this. And then the issue of matching the computer to the purpose and context, because the model will reflect the interest and the disciplinary orientation of its own developers. Here we should open a door to say, why is this important? Because using one model versus another, or a technique versus another, is not neutral. I mean, the choice of a particular technique of a choice of a particular model may already decide the outcome of the analysis. And this has been known to the sociologists of science for a long time. Here I quote Mayone and Ulrich Beck, which is a very famous German sociologist. And you also have a paper of ours here, which you can read. So if you want to read more about this, which some people call this reductionism. Now, what is reductionism? When you develop a model or a matrix where a complex phenomena is compressed to some kind of easily manageable and maybe monodimensional scalar, and you want people to take decision based on the scalar. And then, you know, that this is a kind of technocratic orthodoxy, which is now rightly coming under some kind of strain. This book is also very beautiful and can be, as I mentioned, can be read online. You don't have to buy it. And also, more importantly, mind the consequences, because quantification can backfire. As anyone knows about the crisis of 2008, the last recession was initiated by very poor mathematical models used to price exotic financial product. But there are, in the article, there are a long list of example of quantification which produce very negative outcome, especially in the supplementary information to the article. So where are we now? What happened? Just a second. Okay. This, if you want, I think I'm now to the end of my presentation. The result of this work on quantification published on Nature was this other paper on quantification in general, not only on mathematical modeling. And in this paper, written with many people, especially from the University College of London Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, which is the institute of Mariana Mazzucato. There are many Italians there. We argue that we should think more about ethics of quantification for the reason which we describe here. Now that our world is structured by numbers, the reality constructed with these numbers. These numbers are seductive, performative, confer legitimacy and epistemic power, governing the modern state or even contesting it without number is impossible. This is a lesson of the French stat activist. And then the numbers are the prevalent mean to express value in our society. You know, simply, you know, for instance, you know, your salary is already the best predictor of how high you are in our society. And so the access and production of numbers reflect power and information imbalances. And for this reason, in the paper, we suggest that we should build an observatory on all these kind of quantification. Okay, I finished my presentation here. So I'm ready.
So first of all, well, I start. So thank you for the talk, which was incredibly interesting, and also, to tell you the truth, reflects many. Well, I've been thinking along the same line for many years. So for me, it's a pleasure to see such a concentrate of and such a beautiful review of books, which I think are foundational for the field. So thank you very much. And if there are no other questions, and if we have a couple of hours, I would like to start with my questions, which are quite a few, I will say. I mean, it's first of all, let's say that our master in data science was planned since the beginning with the high level of consciousness of the argument which you have been discussing, because this is why we asked Nicola Russo to teach. It's the first course of this type in Italy, which is about theory and ethics of big data, because, you know, there is the very famous Spider-Man rule: with great power comes great responsibility. And nowadays, people who handle data have very great responsibilities, because, as you say, Katie O'Neill is a wonderful example of how things can go wrong. Now, let me ask you a few questions. You outlined this, but I would like to have your opinion about this. We have two factors here which need to be taken into account. Technology development evolves on a time scale of 3 months, while I think most of the problems come from the fact that the political and legislative process evolves on scales or many years. So basically, by the time you find a solution, this solution is already made obsolete by the technological evolution. Look, for instance, at the European GDPR which regulates the data. And well, it is, I think it's the most advanced regulation for data in the world, but by the time it appeared, it was already obsolete. It was already made obsolete by the technological improvement in the data community. And second, we live in a complex world. And I think that most of the problems which you have exposed today arise from the fact that the level of complexity of the present world is no longer compatible with the fact that the human brain evolved in a three-dimensional world due to evolution, and therefore is no longer capable, is not capable to perceive any correlation, any pattern in more than three dimensions. And therefore, I think that one way or the other, we must learn how to control this process. And this is the second question. The first one is about the time scale of the phenomenon. The second one is about, there is no way we can avoid what's happening. I mean, whatever we do, whatever we will like, doesn't matter. I mean, this is going to happen, but we need to control it. What is your opinion about this? Is it possible to do it? And if it is possible, how?
Sì, dunque, in the first question about the different rate of evolution of technological development and of the political process. Yeah, of course, who can do anything about that? I mean, and also the operator, they know this very well. I mentioned before Zuckerberg, no? Move fast and break things. They know this very well. They know this very well. So this is one of the reasons why we think there should be a kind of observatory. Why? Because a few years ago there was people creating a observatory for genetic technology, for biotechnology, because they were aware that biotechnology were a clear present danger to humanity, no, for possible degeneration and dangerousness. You have seen Black Mirror and related. So we now know this everything because science fiction has always one step ahead. That. So I don't have, of course, a solution for that. I think an observatory would be helpful, and citizens should be more aware. Of course, as intellectuals, what we can do is to try to do this work of making the citizen more sensitive and less gullible about this use of numbers. I have no other magic wonders on that. And about the complex world, again, I doubt that we can do any break-in. We cannot do any, I doubt we can do any serious offensive reaction. We can only organize, I believe, some resistance, which is also, in terms of a class struggle, this is often the option you have because you belong to the class which is less endowed with power, and so you have to resist more than you can provide actually means of attack. So this would be, and again, resistance would pass through society being more aware of these things and more ready to fight back. And the example of the algorithmic justice league and of the movie I suggested, Coded Bias to watch, is that it's not true that the citizens are powerless. The citizen can organize themselves, and fight back in a sense. So it's not that I'm not optimistic, but we cannot even say that we cannot do anything because this would be abdicating our responsibilities.
I want to say there are some connections, some good connections. There is Maria Carmela Godi and Carlo Lauro is connected, Andrea. I want to say hello to you.
Hi, Professor Lauro.
Yes.
I saw him coming online.
Andrea, I also would like to ask you, what is the relationship with data literacy? Is it possible that with I mean, to improve, I mean, to give a power also to the common citizen to use in a best way in the better way the quantification is not a matter of knowing something more about what the data can tell you, and so that I mean we should also some like to, I mean, to empower with the data literacy every citizen and also anybody that makes use of quantification.
Okay, I'll give you a honest answer. I'm quite ambivalent about that. I'm quite ambivalent because I really don't like these people, this idea of the deficit model, because people don't know, they need to be educated. So we are right. No, we the elite, we are right. You simply don't know. So we educate you and eventually you will concur that we are right. So to the extent that data literacy is a way to communicate simply technological knowledge, technological know-how, so that the citizen will become even more obedient to the existing paradigm, I don't like it at all. But if data literacy means instead also education to the political economy of data, if it includes the political economy of data and the political economy of science, then I'm all in favor. So yes. I'm ambivalent. Depends on how you do it.
No, I mean more the second part. I mean the second mean. Yeah. Yeah, because the problem is that most of the times we see arguments in terms of quantification that are just to make, I mean, to use the power. So sometimes the data and the numbers are used to rule the world. Instead, I mean that it should be more the culture of the single citizen about what are all the implications of any type of quantification. So in that respect, I mean, I would like to make a joke by saying that we need more quality, not quantification, but qualification. So I mean to make more quality the information of a number, of a quantitative number.
Sure.
So more qualitative means that you have to make what we say quantitative storytelling. I mean to say what are the assumptions, what are the hypotheses, what are the implications, how can you better use the number, and so on. Yeah. And we have just an example with the pandemic, with COVID. Our politicians were telling all kinds of numbers in the evening. But with, I mean, no information and with also a lot of mistakes in terms of statistical...
infection numbers with 5 significant digits.
Yes.
5 significant digits for a number which is probably uncertain by at least 50%. I want to be generous, no? And they give 5, I mean, it's really madness.
Yes, we were a bit without power to accept all these numbers.
Yeah. No, I wanted to say what I wanted to say. I now forgot, but this is truly COVID has been very instructive on that. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that Lorenzo and Nicola will surely want to comment on that.
I thank you very much for the interesting and rich lecture. You say that numbers quantify values. Which is true, but obviously they only quantify the values of quantifiable quantities, grandezze. From this point of view, Cartese's dream you spoke of tend to be realized in the reduction of the whole realm of values to the quantifiable, with the deleterious consequences you have illustrated. This makes me think that the ethics of quantification you propose is founded, must be founded on a level that is not reduced to that of quantity. In other words, in the ethics of quantification, we must understand the genitive as an objective and not a subjective genitive. I'm wrong?
Yeah, I fully agree. What you are saying is a bit like bring us back to what Roberta was saying. No, it is a qualitative. We had a discussion with Andy Stirling, with this guy in Sussex, with editor of this book, the Blue Book on the Politics of Uncertainty. Someone wants us to believe that the word of, for instance, policy analysis, solution of practical problem can be tackled with quantitative method or with qualitative method. But this is totally idiotic. This does not correspond at all to reality. The methods are all qualitative, no? Qualitative is a big kind of, analytic. You have an analytic work, which is mostly qualitative. Within this analytic work, you have a bubble where there are some kind of quantification which can be tried, attempted, okay? But those quantifications are embedded into a qualitative work. So one thing which is very important, which your question posed to me, if you do ethics, it's very easy to colonize you, in terms of lobby power, for instance. So how would the lobby power act on a service of ethics of quantification? They would do what you just said. They would try to say, okay, but now you look at the ethic of the numbers which are produced, no? So there is again an attempt to reduce the ethics to the quantification and not to the unquantified, because one issue of ethic of quantification, as shown very well by the French stat activist, to say what you did not quantify, no? Look at what you did not quantify, where you did not look into, no? And so you really open different spaces. No, so I would say I fully agree with you on that.
I have the impression that in many cases the purpose is pregiudicato, and it is we think that the purpose is done and not an object of decision,
exactly.
a decision that is not only based on quantity or other per nulla.
Yes, it's left in the background. No. This I agree. This is also the discussion in economics. We concentrate on the economic model and we forget the normative base on which economic base are built. No, so if you accept, for instance, Ricardian theory of economics, it's totally unfair. No, so it's an economic theory based on totally unfair promises, whereby if you export bananas, you will remain poor, and if I export Mercedes, I will be rich. But I'm told that I'm better off exporting bananas. No, so it's really if you accept a world order which is built on unfairness, then don't complain that things don't go the way they should go. But we live in one such world,
Thank you very much.
Is Maria Carmela should like to make a question?
Yes. My question is about what you said before, speaking about the problems in the deficit model. And my question is, should not we think about something similar to the model of public engagement with science for citizens, and thinking of something which we might call public engagement with data and with their quantification? Because we well know that much issue regard also what is not quantified, what possible data are never collected, but why are not they collected? If we think of the beginning of statistics, which has the same root of state, of the noun state, well, it began with the state being interested in collecting some type of data. Then, yes, then there is the very interesting French school of history of statistics and sociology of statistics, you recall them, de Rosière and so on.
Yeah, sure, great.
But if there is not someone who is in power to ask and pay for some type of information being collected and quantified and systematized, that information will not be collected. And this is the point about public engagement with data and with information and with quantification. And I think that also the pandemics showed this issue, because epidemiological models were not targeting the different ways in which people are networking and the frequency with which they are networking, because no one had before being interested in measuring that. So the gap we have in collecting social data that are not of interest for economic enterprises is one of the problems, and is one of the issues I think are open for the next generation of statisticians and of social scientists, who I think have to work together much more than now. I know that the master was born with this type of idea, so I'm very happy about it. But I think we have to work more in that direction, more strongly. Yes.
I did not understand the subject. What was the mass?
The master in which
the master,
now,
sorry.
yes.
The master, sorry, the master.
Which is the guest of this seminar, yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is a way to go forward on. And in Europe, we have, I think, a lot to work about it. So in a stronger alliance between data analysts, modelists, and social scientists.
Yeah.
Before you answer,
sure.
Can I just, Maria needs a lengthy explanation. I also would like to point that there is Lorenzo also wants to make a question, because he has to leave in 20 minutes because he is going to teach theory and ethics of big data to the foreign students.
Okay. Go ahead. I have noted down the question so I can reply later. Go ahead.
Sorry for this, Maria, but I also want to comment it because it's very interesting.
Thanks. No, I just want to ask to Andrea Saltelli. First of all, many thanks for the conference, for the seminar that is really interesting. It is not a question, but just a curiosity. And I would like to know, since it seems that from a philosophical perspective, here technology is not something like an essence, but it is more a social construct. So we can modify the way the technology is simply acting, and try to change the technology, because we are the agent. I think that this is a message that Andrea Saltelli said, that is really similar to also Andrew Feinberg constructivism theory about technology. I would like to know what kind of agency or what kind of institution we can create to avoid this kind of technocratic wave, this kind of technocratic dominion, because the capitalist interest is on the other part. Of course, they want to increase technocratic power, and we saw also that during the pandemic there was this kind of vision somewhere, especially in China or for other. So without the help of politicians, because I don't think that many politicians will help us in this enterprise, what are the strategy that the university, the intellectual world, or even the society can do to avoid this kind of technocratic power of mathematization?
Okay, so I will reply to Lorenzo, but I think the question is very similar to the one of Maria Carmela. So the two things go really together. Public engagement, yes, why not? I mean, the example of the French stat activist, especially the example of the BIP 40, the measure of inequality, how was it born? It was a group of intellectual statisticians. They got together with the trade unions, or the other way around. The trade unions went chasing for the statistician to tell, listen, we see people poor and poorer, but INSEE published data whereby poverty is not increasing in France. What the hell is going on? So they started looking into it and developing this new measure. After a while, Le Monde got interested. INSEE wouldn't talk to them, of course. But then Le Monde got into the game and ran a big piece on this BIP. And then INSEE, they had to talk to them, no? And so eventually they had a discussion and they revised totally the way of measuring inequality. So if you wish, Maria Carmela and Lorenzo, this is a virtuous example of public engagement which worked in a sense. But I also want to say that I'm very pessimistic, because when you talk to public engagement, the lobbyists are the first people who engage themselves. Even if you create an ethical committee, the first people showing up will be the lobbyists, and they will be charming, intelligent, well-educated. They will know everything. They will have the data. They will have the information. I mean, it's hard. So you say, see, society, but society contains very powerful agents within society, sometimes even hidden, as in the case shown by the Les Gardiens de la Raison, the book. No, sometimes these agents act invisibly, like trolls, no, in this society. So yes, we can have public engagement. Yes, we can score success, but we need to be extremely vigilant, because these participatory contexts are very vulnerable to corporate penetration. And the same applies to institutions. I mean, you are not the first one, because I lectured very often on regulatory capture. Everyone wants to know about what institution could do this or that. But the problem is not the institution. The problem is how to control the institution. Exactly. Because take the European Food Safety Authorities. Oh, wow, we have finally an authority which looks into food. No, it's full of lobbyists. You know, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. So we want, are we better off with European Food Safety Authority or not? It's not an easy question to answer, no? So I don't know that we can easily develop this kind of institution at the same time protecting them from corporate penetration. It's difficult.
Can I comment on this? I think basically it's impossible, not difficult, for the simple reason that, I mean, we have forgotten one piece of the equation. Of course, there was not enough time, but the other piece of the equation is the artificial intelligence developments, which really is the other part of the story. And because, you know, data are one of the drivers of artificial intelligence. Without big data and without machine learning, there will be no artificial intelligence. But on the other end, there is a pressure, I mean, just to handle the complexity of the world toward this artificial intelligence problem, which in my opinion summarizes all the problems we have been discussing today together. The problem is that there is no way you can keep corporations or, you know, specific groups of interest out of the game. The problem is how to develop a new generation, because I mean, I am been a data scientist for 30 years almost, something like that, and I am already belong to an older generation, but there is a new generation, the newcomers who are born in this environment, who have a completely different perception of this reality in this world, and somehow they are not paying enough attention to the sociological and the political and the legislative implications, because they are learning the techniques, they are learning the methods, they are learning the mathematics, let's say, or the statistics behind the methods, but they do not pay enough attention to the implication of what they are doing. So I think that the first thing to do is to develop a new sort of curriculum, a new way of teaching, because I don't like when Lorenzo says technocrats. I think that the worst problem in our society is to keep the two parts separate. This is a mistake which was done at the end of the 19th century. I mean, but there is nothing like human sciences and hard sciences. It's culture in general. So we should have a sort of holistic approach to the problem, which is difficult to implement in university curricula. It's difficult to bring into high school and this type of. So I think that what we should do and what we could do is to think on how to modernize these the teaching of this topic in such a way that the solution will emerge naturally from the new generations. I mean, I don't know what Andrea thinks about this or what Maria Carmela, but for instance, this is also why, together with Nicola, Lorenzo, and the other, we have started an interdepartmental laboratory between philosophy, physics, mathematics, and I hope also sociologists will join us to discuss these topics in order, to try to be innovative in this perspective, let's say. And yeah, more things. Sorry, just I add the last thing, then I swear I shut up. But the problem is really very close to my heart. I think that one of the big mistakes which is been doing right now is this story of the explainable artificial intelligence, which is just a way to put smoke in front of the eye of people, because basically you are not justifying what you are doing. You are just convincing people that what you have done is right because you present the results in a way they can understand. But you are not saying anything about the quality of the results.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I also think it's quite difficult to have this kind of explainable artificial intelligence. And Louisa Moore, which I mentioned, the Cloud Ethics book, she says it very clearly in the book, though in the end she concludes that engineers should be trained to work in such a way that they become transparent. I mean, I was reflecting about the conclusion of her book, and I was scratching my head, and I said, damn it, if after decades we haven't convinced mathematical modelers to be transparent, no? How you want to convince the engineering working in artificial intelligence to be transparent? Really, this, I mean, is a bit defying the imagination, no? That we will eventually convince those people to actually implement this kind of transparency, especially when the market will not be for this kind of deliverable. Unless the citizen really, I don't know, but at the moment, it doesn't seem like this is what the market wants.
Other questions, comment?
May I just, sorry, just a comment to say that I totally agree with you about the fact that we need new kinds of curricula. I think this is fundamental for the new generation. I was also speaking of new generation in this sense. And I think this is important wherever we use models. And thinking of economics, there is a very nice book called An Engine not a camera. And this is about how economic model and financial model do function. Yeah. They, the sense in which Andrea Saltelli was saying that they, in some way, perform reality. They are performative in tools, not just descriptions. Yes, and it's important to have people who use model to be conscious also of the alternative functioning of what they are modeling and the alternative ways of modeling what they are intended to describe in its functioning. So I think that the idea of new curricula is fundamental, and we have to go ahead with it.
Yeah, if I can comment on this new curricula, which I didn't pick up from Giuseppe's question, I'm all in favor. In Bergen, where I've been teaching, I'm still teaching in Bergen in a couple of courses. In Bergen, there is a mandatory course in history and philosophy of science for all PhD students, all discipline. You cannot let any kind of people leave university without knowing about Kuhn or Popper or Feyerabend or Lagerlöf. And the people should know about this discussion. Otherwise, what kind of science, what kind of academic work can they perform if they have been totally deprived of the discussion between the School of Frankfurt and the School of Vienna? And I mean, all these things are terribly important. They have a dramatic bearing on today's affairs. Otherwise, we risk discovering the wheel, no? We really enter into discussion which had been held a long time before. You mentioned the deficit model, no? But this was a discussion with Dewey and Lichtman, almost a century ago, and we are at exactly the same point. Can the public be educated, or can the public only be manipulated? We are not far from that. I mean, this is really. A student should learn about that because they are not surprised. They say, okay.
Andrea, but the problem is that we are biting our tail, because on one end we have an academy which more and more is based on the publish or perish principle, and therefore, since we cannot evaluate quality, we are substituting it with quantity. So basically, and therefore you have also people who cannot spend much of their time in understanding the foundation of their discipline, and because they are obliged to produce in order to get permanent position, to get progression of career. It doesn't matter if they produce very low quality work, like it's happening. I mean, because the level of scientific production has gone downhill exponentially over the last 10 years. And therefore, and on the other hand, in order to cure this disease, you need to have a new generation of socially aware and philosophically aware scientists, which is very difficult to create. I mean, we are making effort in that direction. Nicola is giving a course on the foundation of physics to the or foundational science to the physics students. We have this course in theory and ethics of big data. We are planning other extension in this direction, but it's very difficult unless there is a drastic change in attitude in the society. So it was a comment, not a question. So. Biagio, it's your turn.
Yes, Biagio.
Yes, thank you. Just want to make a comment about the curricula, because we, the Department of Social Sciences, I remember we have this digital sociology and web analysis master degree that is connected with data science degree, master degree, so that students can take both the degrees just with the 1 year more. So our students can go to the data science master course with just 1 year, get the data science course, degree, as well as data scientists can come to our department just with 1 year, takes the digital sociology and web analysis master degree. we're trying to do that also in Federico II to merge these competencies that, as you, Andrea Saltelli, Professor, saying, are fundamental for the everyone understand that what are the functions of data, because data, they're not only useful to describe reality, but fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, they just make reality, they build reality, and they rule reality. So they really have three very important functions that sometimes we dismiss, just pretend they are just describing reality. But I want to start from your last slide, the one about the observatory. I'm trying to build an observatory on algorithms here in the Department of Social Sciences, but I would like this observatory, this business vision of quantification that is based on the finding the best test of significance, the best model, the best data, or whatever, but just build evidence about the fact that the data, the models, are the results of compromises, are the results of fights, of discussion between actors that are the scientists, that are the politicians, the administrators that need this data, the experts, the lobbyists, and also all the human actors that participate in this assemblage, this data assemblage, because you have also the very important human actors that intervene in this construction. For example, the rules about ethics, the rules about privacy, the machines, the computers, the softwares, the hardwares, and so on. And this is all a question for me of the politics of quantification. The politics of quantification is of paramount importance. And so the question is, how do we can build evidence about how this politics acts and how this politics intervene and impact differently on the different categories of society? Because many of the books you were presenting show that some models may be good for someone, but completely wrong and bad for others people. There is, for example, in the book of Katie O'Neill, the example of the compass algorithm, the one that was used for preventing recidivism of crime. It makes clearly explicit that it's impossible to be the model that does not make inequality for some categories of people. So question is, how can we make evidence of this? So make explicit that this is a question, so that the model can be useful for something but not for others, can impact differently on some category of people and not on others. So in a recent book that I wrote on algorithm audit, I tried to make some examples of how social research methods may be used to build this evidence. For example, like how survey methods can be used to survey people impacted by algorithms, how social experiments can be made to understand if an algorithm may create, for example, exclusion, how ethnography may help in understanding the building of algorithms, how all the compromises, the fights that we were talking before can emerge when we build this. So I would like, and this is from the research point of view, so I would like to know what you think about this. And about the political point of view, honestly, I read the very interesting, the recent work from the European Commission about artificial intelligence, about the rules of artificial intelligence. And what I found in that report, I think is still more optimistic than critical. So what I see,
of course, of course.
the best.
What did you expect?
No, exactly. No, what I expect. Actually, I expect critical optimism. I think that will be the good push to challenge this kind of risks, because when we oppose it, the criticals, the social scientists, the criticals, the public, the criticals, against the corporation, the optimistics, the scientists, the optimistics, I think we don't get the point. I think if we want to get to fight this, we have to be critical optimists. It is quite I think the posture that is right to fight this, because as far as we are set apart, I think that would be a problem. So if you want to, I agree with Longo about the fact that the artificial intelligence cannot explain to everyone. But what if we have an accountability by design inside the what if we can imagine an artificial intelligence where you have to make an impact assessment, as well as you have an impact assessment, for example, in environment. As soon as you have...
Okay, Biagio, I think you give more or less a seminar now.
You have answered the question already. In a sense, you answered the question already.
We stopped recording then.
The questions are how social research methods, if for you, can help in this, and what about how politically can be dealt with all this? Yeah, Thank you very much.
Welcome, Biagio, but you answered the question yourself, because you already wrote a book about that, about where, I mean, and Katie O'Neill is also an example. They do hackathons, so they gather together, they try to unpack the algorithm and to reveal the inequality, class and gender bias of these algorithms. So this is, in this sense, the root is well traced, and the example of the Algorithmic Justice League is very good. But you mentioned, I just shared with you a paper on regulatory capture, because in this paper, there is a test case on the ethics guidelines of the European Commission. And one ethicist sitting there, so one colleague of Nicola was furious because nobody was an ethicist in this panel. They were all lobbyists, no? And so the guidelines progressively lost all the edge. No, in the original guideline, there were, no autonomous lethal weapon, no control of the citizen, they will say these are red lines. They have dropped everything, So when the final document came out, it was all positive. Now, let's be practical. You are scientists, you want money, you want funding. You open the work program, Horizon Europe, okay? And you look for digitalization on Horizon Europe.
Exactly.
Okay. If you have done the work, and I have done it, it's almost impossible to pass a project there with the kind of stuff we are discussing here today, because everything is in the positive. Digitalization helps society, helps grow. How to use digitalization to help the people with disability, how to use digitalization to better serve the citizen. In Italy, you see, Draghi, the first thing he said, we spend the money on digitalization. So what is the problem? Anyhow, I wanted to just to add to the previous discussion that in this paper I was mentioning the ethicist is Thomas Metzinger, a German ethicist, is important. Is a good guy, good, interesting person too. No, Giuseppe, why not? But still, I believe that you are talking about Erasmus, you are talking about cost.
No, I'm talking about even synergy or things like this. You can also get big money for that.
Okay.
That's my point. So it's...
Yeah. But still, I'm still looking. Yes.
Okay.
So,
any other question?
So who starts thanking Andrea for this really interesting, exciting talk and discussion?
Well, personally, I have to thank Andrea, and I would like also to inform everybody that Andrea will be one of the keynote speakers of the next conference in September, Big to Small. It's a small area estimation community. So it's a very nice conference with the community of data scientists and community of statisticians working in small area estimation. And we, with a great pleasure, Andrea accepts our invitation. So he will give the final keynote lecture of our conference. So that, well, I think it will leave all the audience to think over about all these possibilities to quantify also in the small area estimation field, but making a wise use of the technology.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Andrea.
much. On the 20, yes, I have it.
Peppe, you should end the.
Well,
the
I leave the final words to Flora, but I would just want to say something. I'm very glad you gave this lecture because in a few days it will be 1 year since the death of Antonio Picariello, to whom these lectures are entitled, and it has been a real pleasure for me to have you as our last Picariello speaker for this year, and we hope that you will be willing to give another lecture in the next year, in the next cycle of the Picariello lecture, which we start in the next academic year. So thank you very much. Flora, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you too.